There are two different kinds of neurotransmitters in the autonomic nervous system. Acetylcholine is released by cholinergic fibers. All of the preganglionic axons in the autonomic nervous system are cholinergic fibers. All of the parasympathetic postganglionic axons are cholinergic fibers. The other neurotransmitter is norepinephrine. This is released by adrenergic fibers. Most of the sympathetic postganglionic axons are adrenergic. The exceptions are sweat glands and some of the blood vessels of the external genitalia. Whether these neurotransmitters are excitatory or inhibitory depends upon the receptors on the effectors. In the somatic system, all of the fibers are cholinergic. They all release acetylcholine, which is always excitatory. That is because of the type of receptors on the muscle. In the autonomic nervous system, all of the preganglionic fibers release acetylcholine, so they are all cholinergic. The postganglionic fibers in the parasympathetic nervous system also release acetylcholine, so they too are cholinergic. But the postganglionic fibers in the sympathetic system release norepinephrine. Here we cannot be as predictable about what the effects will be because it depends upon what kind of receptors are on the effector organs. Cholinergic receptors are the receptors that will respond to acetylcholine. We have two types. Nicotinic receptors are always stimulatory. They always excite the postsynaptic cell. The motor end plates of skeletal muscle, which is part of the somatic system, has nicotinic receptors. All of the parasympathetic postganglionic neurons also have nicotinic receptors, so we always get excitation of the postganglionic neurons. The hormone-producing cells of the adrenal medulla also contain nicotinic receptors, so that we always excite the adrenal medulla. The muscarinic receptors can be inhibitory or stimulatory. All of these are found on the parasympathetic effectors. Their effect can vary depending upon the organ. For example, acetylcholine in the cardiac muscle decreases activity, where in the smooth muscle of the gastrointestinal tract it increases activity. Adrenergic receptors respond to norepinephrine. All of the postganglionic sympathetic effectors have to have adrenergic receptors because the postganglionic sympathetic fibers release norepinephrine. There are two types of receptors. Alpha receptors are generally stimulatory, but there are some exceptions. And we have two subclasses of alpha receptors, alpha 1 and alpha 2. Beta receptors are generally inhibitory, and we've discovered three different subclasses of beta receptors: beta 1, beta 2, and beta 3. Organs responding to norepinephrine can have both alpha receptors and beta receptors, but one type of receptor dominates so that there is one response that is more likely to occur as a result of the norepinephrine release. The effects of norepinephrine depend upon which subclass of the receptor predominates on the target organ. If you know the location and the types of receptors, you can determine the effects drugs can have on the autonomic nervous system. Drugs can be used to alter its function. Nicotinic agents will be sympathetic stimulants. Nicotine is a nicotinic agent. This is because of the nicotinic receptors in the adrenal medulla. Muscarinic agents will be parasympathetic agents. Pilocarpine is a drug that is a muscarinic agent. They use this drug to treat glaucoma. Atropine is an anticholinergic drug. It blocks muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. This means that it's going to block the parasympathetic effects. This is given to dry up saliva during surgery. Ophthalmologists also use this to dilate the pupils. Neostigmine inhibits acetylcholine esterase. This means that acetylcholine can build up in the synapse. This is used to treat myasthenia gravis. This is an autoimmune disease that involves the acetylcholine receptors on skeletal muscle. With fewer receptors, we need more acetylcholine in the synapse, and we need it to be there longer for the muscles to work effectively. Drugs that prolong norepinephrine activity help relieve depression. Elavil is a tricyclic antidepressant. It prolongs the effects of norepinephrine on the sympathetic postsynaptic membrane. This is one of those feel-good neurotransmitters. Over-the-counter drugs for colds and allergies will stimulate alpha adrenergic receptors. Phenylephrine is one of these. The idea is to constrict the blood vessels in the nasal mucosa and to inhibit mucus secretion. But those alpha receptors are on all of the blood vessels, so all blood vessels are somewhat affected by this. A lot of the over-the-counter drugs for colds and allergies caution hypertensives about taking them. Beta blockers are drugs that attach to the beta 1 receptors. This helps reduce heart rate and prevent arrhythmias. Drugs that attach to the beta 2 receptors are used to dilate lung bronchioles in asthmatics. There are basically three ways that the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system can interact. Mostly they are both active and sort of produce antagonistic effects. This is one of the ways we maintain homeostasis. In certain circumstances, one system is in charge. It predominates the other. And in a few cases, they actually have to cooperate with each other. The antagonistic interaction is the most common. The sympathetic system is in charge during emergency situations. It increases heart rate and respiration and inhibits digestion and elimination. The parasympathetic system is in charge in the resting state. It will restore heart rate and respiratory rate to normal. It will increase digestion and the refueling process, and it increases waste disposal, activating the kidneys and keeping peristaltic movement going. There are a few situations where one system or the other is in control. The sympathetic system, for example, is in control of blood pressure, even at rest. The sympathetic system constantly sends impulses to the smooth muscle of the blood vessels, keeping them partially contracted. This is known as vasomotor tone or sympathetic tone. Alpha blocker drugs interfere with the vasomotor fibers, and this can be used to treat hypertension. In circulatory shock, which is certainly an emergency situation, the blood vessels will constrict. The sympathetic nervous system will increase smooth muscle contraction, and this will cause the blood in the skin and the digestive organs to be shunted to the more vital organs. The parasympathetic system is in control of some things. Normally, the parasympathetic system dominates heart, digestive system, urinary organs, and most glands, with the exception of the adrenal gland and the sweat glands. The parasympathetic system sends constant signals to the smooth muscle of these organs to help keep them partially contracted at all times. This is parasympathetic tone. The parasympathetic system sends impulses to the natural pacemaker of the heart, slowing the heart down just a little bit so that we have a normal beat of 75 times per minute, and also sets the activity level for the smooth muscle in the digestive and urinary systems. The sympathetic system can override the parasympathetic system in all of these organs. Drugs blocking parasympathetic responses will increase heart rate and can cause fecal and urinary retention. The two systems have to cooperate during sexual response. Both of them send fibers to the genitalia. Initially, the parasympathetic system has to be in control. This allows for the vasodilation of blood vessels that allows the external genitalia to become erect, particularly in the male. If individuals are anxious or upset, the sympathetic nervous system can be activated and this vasodilation may not occur. As sexual activity begins to peak, we get to that excitement stage, which stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. This causes smooth muscle contraction that allows for ejaculation in males and reflexive peristalsis in females. This is what is known as orgasm. The sympathetic system does have some unique roles. It's involved in thermoregulation. The sympathetic system mediates all the reflexes that control body temperature homeostasis. The erector pili muscles will contract when you're cold to try to generate some heat, and the sweat glands will be activated when you're too warm so that sweat will evaporate and cool you down. The sympathetic nervous system will increase blood pressure. It causes the kidneys to release renin. Renin can cause an increase in blood pressure using a system called the renin-angiotensin mechanism, something you'll learn more about when you talk about the heart and blood pressure. Metabolism can be increased by the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system will stimulate the release of glucose from the liver into the bloodstream and will also mobilize fats to be used for fuel. The sympathetic and parasympathetic systems have different kinds of effects on the body. The parasympathetic system effects are relatively short-lived and highly localized. One neuron signals another neuron, which goes to one effector. We call this a convergent system. For example, if you see food and smell food, that's two sensory inputs, but the parasympathetic system will turn that only into salivation. You'll only send impulses to your salivary glands. The parasympathetic system only releases acetylcholine, and acetylcholine is very quickly degraded in the synapse. The sympathetic system has a much longer lasting and more widespread response. The neurons that come out at one level will travel up and down the sympathetic chain. They signal at several levels, so that one neuron may go to several different organs. For example, if you see a tiger charging you, you're going to have an increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, you're going to redirect blood to your skeletal muscles. You will have a widespread response to that one incoming stimulus. Norepinephrine is released by the postganglionic fibers. It's inactivated more slowly than acetylcholine. Also, you'll remember that the sympathetic response triggers the medulla to release norepinephrine and epinephrine. So most of the norepinephrine and epinephrine is hormonal rather than neurotransmitter. There are basically three parts of the brain that control the autonomic nervous system. The brainstem and the spinal cord have the cardiovascular centers, the respiratory center. All of these reflexively regulate heart, blood vessel diameter, and respiration. The hypothalamus is the overall integration center. This is the boss of the autonomic nervous system. All of your homeostatic mechanisms are located here, as well as your emotions and drives. Even though we talk about the autonomic system being our unconscious system, cortical control can play a role. Your thoughts can affect your involuntary responses. Your cerebral cortex will communicate through the limbic system to the hypothalamus. This will help add emotion to thought. For example, if you're watching a scary movie, your heart rate will increase, your blood pressure will go up, your breathing will increase. You'll show sympathetic effects. If you're angry, your blood pressure goes up. These are examples of how cortical thought, coupled with emotion, can communicate with the hypothalamus and cause autonomic changes. We can also use this in biofeedback training. Some people who have hypertension, particularly stress-related hypertension, can learn to think themselves calm and thus reduce their blood pressure. So here you see that the hypothalamus is the overall boss. It can send information to the brainstem and the spinal cord for some of those reflexive movements to happen. It can send input and get input from the limbic system, which can also send and receive input from the cerebral cortex. So your thoughts can have emotions attached to them. That can go to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus can control what happens from there. Let's look at the effects of the autonomic nervous system on just a few organs. Your digestive system has dual innervation. The parasympathetic system will increase digestive activity. The sympathetic system will decrease it. Sweat glands are controlled only by the sympathetic system, so the parasympathetic system has no effect, but the sympathetic system will stimulate sweating. Blood vessels are also only under the control of the sympathetic system. The parasympathetic system has no effect, but the sympathetic system varies. We can change the diameter of the blood vessels by either sending responses or not. The adrenal medulla is stimulated only by the sympathetic system, so no effect from the parasympathetic system, but the release of norepinephrine and epinephrine if the sympathetic system is in play. The erector pili muscles are part of your heat mechanism, so the parasympathetic system has no effect, but the sympathetic system stimulates these to contract. The idea here is that muscle contraction will generate heat. The heart muscle is dually innervated. The parasympathetic system decreases the rate. The sympathetic system will increase both the force of the contraction and the rate of the heart. Autonomic neuropathy is damage to the autonomic nerves due to the loss of blood flow to these nerves. This is relatively common in diabetics. Once we lose autonomic control of blood vessels, we have a number of complications: sexual dysfunction, poor blood pressure control, constipation, urinary incontinence, and pain and numbness in the extremities. These areas tend to get necrotic and we get sores. This is why most diabetics lose toes and sometimes whole feet as a result of this neuropathy. Hypertension is another imbalance of the autonomic nervous system. Hypertension may be stress-related. If stress is involved, the sympathetic nervous system will trigger the release of the various stress hormones. We will see an overactive sympathetic vasoconstriction. Once the blood vessels are made too small, it overworks the heart, and it also damages the blood vessels. Hypertension can be treated with alpha-1 blockers. Raynaud's disease is another homeostatic imbalance of the autonomic nervous system. Here there's an exaggerated reaction to cold. The sympathetic nervous system overreacts to thermoregulation. The attacks typically are intermittent. Vasoconstriction is exaggerated when the body is exposed to cold or emotional stress. The blood vessels overconstrict and not enough blood goes into the extremities. Blood carries oxygen, so the tissues of the extremities become oxygen deprived. The fingers and the toes become pale, cyanotic, and very painful. This disease runs the gamut from discomfort to gangrene. The vasoconstriction can be so severe for so long that tissue is actually destroyed. It can be treated with a sympathectomy. That is, we cut the sympathetic nerves to the affected area. Sometimes vasodilators can be used. Autonomic dysreflexia is a life-threatening autonomic nervous system imbalance. Here we have an uncontrolled activation of the autonomic neurons. Quadriplegics and people with spinal cord injuries above T6 tend to be bothered by this. Painful stimuli or overfilling of an organ like the bladder can trigger this response. Blood pressure suddenly skyrockets. There's headache, there's sweating above the injury, and they get a flushed face. The high blood pressure increases the risk for stroke. As we age, the autonomic nervous system becomes less efficient. In the parasympathetic division, peristaltic activity of the digestive system may slow, leading to constipation. Tear production may be reduced, leading to dry eyes and frequent eye infections in the elderly. In the sympathetic division, we tend to see orthostatic hypotension. This is a low blood pressure after position changes, going from sitting to standing or lying down to sitting or lying down to standing. The pressure receptors become less responsive to blood pressure changes. They fail to constrict the vessels fast enough to ensure that there's a good blood supply to the brain.